I thought the hardest battles of my life were behind me when I left the army. But 2 years later, my sister Claire convinced me to visit a small animal shelter, and I had no idea my past was waiting for me there. As I walked through the rows of kennels, scanning the dogs with little expectation, I saw him. Max. My war dog. My partner. The one who had saved my life more times than I could count. But when I called his name, nothing. No recognition. No wagging tail. His sharp, loyal eyes were empty, distant, like he had forgotten everything we'd been through. What happened to him after we were separated? And more importantly, could I bring back the dog who had once meant the world to me? This is the story of how I fought to reconnect with Max, the one who never gave up on me, even when the world tried to break him. Before we dive into this emotional journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single chapter of Ethan and Max's incredible story of loyalty, trauma, and redemption. Trust me, you'll want to see this through to the end. The Arizona sun was setting, casting long shadows across the gravel road as I approached the shelter. The sound of my boots scraping against the ground pulled at memories I'd spent the last 2 years trying to forget. I had thrown myself into new jobs, therapy, anything to dull the pain. Nothing worked. Claire's voice echoed in my mind. You need something to help you heal, Ethan. Maybe a dog will remind you that not everything is hopeless. At first, I laughed her off. But now here I was. And the thought felt ridiculous. The shelter was small, worn down, its chain-link fences rusted and sagging. Inside, the sharp scent of disinfectant mixed with the sound of barking dogs. I walked past the kennels, my eyes scanning each one. Some dogs wagged their tails eagerly, pressing against the bars. Others sat quietly, watching me with cautious curiosity. But none of them felt right. None of them could replace what I'd lost. I was about to turn back when a voice stopped me. Ethan Caldwell. I turned to see a young woman with short blonde hair neatly tucked behind her ears. Her name tag read Sarah Whitman, and she carried herself with a calm authority. Yeah, I replied. Just looking. She nodded. We just got a German Shepherd in a few weeks ago. He's in the back. Maybe you'd like to see him. Something about her tone made my chest tighten. German Shepherd? I followed her down a quieter aisle. At the very end, in the farthest corner, a large dog lay curled up on the floor. His black and tan fur was matted, his posture stiff, almost lifeless. Even before I saw his face, I knew. Max. My voice cracked. Slowly, he lifted his head. Our eyes met, but there was no spark of recognition. His eyes, once sharp and filled with unshakable loyalty, were hollow. Empty. Sarah glanced at me, her voice softer now. Do you know him? I swallowed hard, my throat tight. We were partners in the army. Her gaze shifted with understanding. He's been through a lot. Transferred here from another state after being surrendered. Anxiety. Trust issues. I knelt in front of the cage, my hand hovering just beyond the bars. Max, it's me, I whispered. No response. No tail wag. No recognition. Just a blank stare, like I was a stranger. A storm of emotions crashed over me, shock, grief, frustration. How could he not remember me? Sarah hesitated. Would you like to spend some time with him? We can take him to the play yard. I barely found my voice. Yeah, let's try. A shadow of his former self. The play yard was small, enclosed by chain-link fencing. Patches of grass peeked through dry dirt, a few chew toys scattered across the space. Max stepped out of the kennel slowly, his movements hesitant, cautious. I gave him space, not wanting to overwhelm him. He sniffed the air, circling the yard with his tail low, watchful, but detached. I knelt, extending my hand. Max, buddy, it's me. It's Ethan. For a split second, his ears twitched. Hope flared my chest. But then he turned away. The rejection hit harder than I expected. Sarah sighed softly. It's going to take time. He's been through more than we know. Time. That's all I had for the past 2 years. Time to think. Time to regret. Time to miss him. I clenched my fists, frustration and determination colliding inside me. I'm not giving up on him. Sarah gave a small nod. Then let's start slow. A silent drive home. The ride home was eerily quiet. Max sat in the back seat, his body pressed against the door, staring out the window. His posture was stiff, like he was bracing for something, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. This wasn't the Max I remembered. 2 years ago, he was a force of nature, alert, fearless, always one step ahead. On missions, he was my second pair of eyes, my protector. He had barked warnings, pulled me back from danger. But now he looked like a shadow of the dog I once knew. When we pulled into my driveway, I parked and stepped out, inhaling deeply to steady myself. "Come on, buddy," I said gently, opening the truck door. Max hesitated. His ears twitched, but he didn't move. I crouched, trying to meet his gaze. "It's okay, Max. You're safe now." After a long pause, he finally jumped down. His steps were slow, cautious. He sniffed the air, scanning the yard warily. Inside, I had set up a corner of the living room for him. New dog bed, fresh water, food, a few toys. I pointed to the space. "This is yours, buddy." Max sniffed the air, but didn't approach. Instead, he stayed near the door, tense. That night, I left my bedroom door open. A silent invitation. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I replayed memories. Our training, our first mission, the way he had always been at my side. Somewhere around midnight, I heard soft footsteps on the wooden floor. I held my breath. Max stopped just outside my room, then lay down near the doorway. He didn't come all the way inside. But it was a start. A long road ahead. The next morning, I woke to find Max sitting by the window, staring outside. His posture was tense, lost, like he didn't know where he belonged. I swallowed hard. "Good morning, Max," I said, keeping my voice light. For a moment, he glanced at me. Then he turned back to the window. My chest ached. I didn't just need to save Max. I needed to bring him back. And I wasn't going to stop until I did. Bringing Max back. For days, we lived in this quiet, fragile rhythm. I tried to reach him. He kept his distance. It was like walking a tightrope, balancing between patience and persistence, between giving him space and showing him I wasn't leaving. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and rain began to fall in a steady drizzle, Max stood by the open doorway, his nose twitching at the scent of damp earth. I sat on the couch, watching him carefully, searching for any flicker of recognition. I needed a new approach, something familiar, something that could cut through the fog in his mind. I reached into the drawer and pulled out a small, worn whistle. It was the same one I had used during our missions. 2 sharp notes had always been his signal to return. Holding it between my fingers, I hesitated. Would this bring him back? Or would it push him further away? Taking a deep breath, I blew 2 crisp notes into the silence. Max's ears shot up. His body tensed. He turned toward me, his eyes locked onto the whistle. My heart pounded. Did he remember? "Do you know this, buddy?" My voice was steady, but my hands trembled slightly. For a long moment, he didn't move. His gaze flickered with something. Hesitation, maybe recognition. Then, slowly, he took a step forward. And then another. I placed the whistle on the floor and leaned back. "It's okay," I whispered. "Only if you're ready." Max stood frozen, staring at the whistle as if it held a memory buried deep inside him. Then, cautiously, he lowered his head and sniffed it. His nostrils flared. His muscles relaxed, just a little. I held my breath, afraid to break whatever fragile moment this was. And then, for the first time, Max looked up at me. Not through me. At me. It was only a second. But it was everything. That night, I lay awake listening to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Just as my eyelids grew heavy, I heard it, the soft padding of paws against the wooden floor. I stayed still, barely breathing. Max stopped a few feet away from my bed. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to let me know he was there. I closed my eyes, feeling a weight in my chest that wasn't pain, but hope. The next morning, I decided to build on that progress. Standing in the backyard, I held up an old, worn rubber ball, the same one we used to train with in the Army. It was scratched and battered, a relic of another life. "Hey, Max," I called, keeping my tone light. He stood near the porch, watching me cautiously. I tossed the ball across the yard. What do you think, buddy? Still remember how to fetch? Max didn't move at first. He just stood there, tail low, ears flicking uncertainly. Then, to my surprise, he took a step forward. I held my breath as he slowly approached the ball, nudging it with his nose. For a moment, he just stood there, contemplating. Then, tentatively, he picked it up in his mouth. A smile broke across my face. Good boy, Max. He carried it halfway back before dropping it, his eyes flicking up to meet mine, unsure. He wasn't ready to bring it all the way. Not yet. But he wanted to try. That night, as the rain continued to fall, Max made the move that nearly broke me. As I sat on the couch, lost in thought, I felt him. A presence. I glanced down. Max had walked over and laid down beside me. Not touching, but close. Closer than he had ever been. I didn't move. Didn't speak. I just let the moment sink in. Because, for the first time, I wasn't trying to bring Max back. He was finding his way back to me. And no matter how long it took, I wasn't giving up. Finding Max again. Something about Max's behavior nagged at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story. Something Sarah hadn't told me. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. Hey, Sarah, I said, trying to sound casual. I've been working with Max, and we're making some progress. But I can't stop wondering. Do you know anything more about what happened to him before the shelter? There was a long silence on the other end. I was hoping you wouldn't ask, she said at last, her voice hesitant. There are details in his file that I didn't share. I didn't want to overwhelm you. Sarah, I need to know, I pressed. Whatever it is, I can handle it. She sighed. Max was surrendered to a small shelter in another state before he was transferred here. His previous owner, they didn't know how to handle him. He was kept isolated, chained up in a backyard. There were reports of neglect and possible abuse. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Neglect? Abuse? I clenched the phone, my mind racing. The fearless, loyal partner I had known in the army, the dog who had once been my lifeline, had spent nearly a year suffering, alone and forgotten. How long was he with them? I asked, my throat tight. Almost a year, she answered softly. I'm sorry, Ethan. I know this must be hard to hear. Hard didn't even begin to cover it. After I hung up, I sat in silence, staring at Max. He was curled up by the window again, his gaze distant, lost. I noticed things I hadn't before, the small tear on his ear, the faint scar along his side. How had I missed those? A wave of guilt crashed over me. I should have been there for him. I should have fought harder to adopt him when the army retired him. Instead, I had let him slip away. I knelt beside him. Max, I whispered. His ears twitched, but he didn't look at me. I'm so sorry, buddy. I let you down. The weight of those words settled between us. That afternoon, I decided we needed a change. I took Max to the park, a place where he could feel the grass under his paws, the open sky above him, a place that might remind him of the freedom we once shared. At first, he hesitated, his body tense as we walked through the gate. But as we moved deeper into the park, something shifted. His posture softened. I found a quiet spot under a tree and sat down, letting him explore at his own pace. Do you remember this, Max? I asked, tossing his old rubber ball a short distance. To my surprise, his ears perked slightly. He watched the ball roll, then cautiously approached it. He sniffed it, nudged it, and, after a long pause, picked it up. Then, for the first time, he brought it back to me. You're still in there, I murmured, running my hand over his head. And this time, Max didn't pull away. That night, back home, Max did something that left me speechless. As I sat on the couch, he climbed up beside me and rested his head on my lap. I froze, barely breathing, afraid to break the moment. You're coming back to me, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I stayed awake, running my fingers gently through his fur, silently promising him that I'd never let anything happen to him again. The next morning, as the sun rose, I stepped onto the porch, inhaling the crisp air. Max followed, his movements more relaxed than they had been in weeks. "Ready for today, buddy?" I asked. His ears perked up slightly. Then, for the first time, his tail wagged. It was small, hesitant, but it was there. Today, we were going back, to where it all began. The drive to the old training field was different this time. Max didn't press himself against the door like before. He sat upright, watching the world pass by. When we arrived, the sight of the open field hit me with a flood of memories. The tall grass swayed in the breeze. Birds called in the distance. I opened the door, and Max jumped out, his nose to the ground as he took in his surroundings. I stayed back, letting him explore. "Do you remember this place, Max?" I asked softly. His head lifted. His eyes scanned the field, as if searching for a memory. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the whistle, the same one I had used during our missions. Lifting it to my lips, I blew 2 sharp notes. Max froze. His body tensed. For a moment, I thought I'd made a mistake. But then, something changed. His ears flicked forward. His muscles loosened. And then, he turned to me. "Come on, Max," I called, my voice filled with the same energy I had used in the field. And this time, without hesitation, he ran to me. His movements were fluid, confident. He skidded to a stop at my feet, sitting tall, eyes locked on mine. I dropped to my knees, wrapping my arms around him. He didn't pull away. He leaned into me, his tail wagging wildly. We spent the next hour running through our old drills. Commands, fetch, even a mock search exercise. Max responded flawlessly, as if the past 2 years had melted away. But the most emotional moment came when he brought the ball back to me for the 3rd time. He dropped it at my feet, then looked up at me, his eyes no longer empty. They were filled with trust, with loyalty, and something else, recognition. "You're back," I whispered, stroking his head. The drive home was quiet, but different. Max didn't just sit in the back seat. He lay with his head resting on the seat's edge, watching me in the mirror. And every so often, his tail thumped softly against the seat. When we got home, Max didn't hesitate to follow me inside. He walked straight to his corner in the living room, the bed I had bought him weeks ago. And this time, he laid down on it without hesitation. Later that night, as I sat on the couch, Max jumped up beside me again. But this time, there was no hesitation. He pressed into me, trusted me. I ran my fingers through his fur, peace settling over me. "We made it, Max," I murmured. "We're a team again." And as Max lay curled at the foot of my bed that night, I knew. We had found our way back to each other. A story of loyalty, love, and healing. This journey between Ethan and Max shows us the true power of loyalty, love, and determination in the face of life's hardest battles. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. Share your own experiences, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. There are more powerful stories waiting to be told, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey with us.